I had been following the rain for 3 nights. It came down like a whispering veil over the sleeping town of Barrage, soaking its cobblestones and muting its sins. My case, a missing historian named Evelyn Crane, had led me to an address long erased from the city's registry, number 13 Wren Alley. The alley was a narrow, crooked thing, choked with vines and the smell of old paper left too long in the damp. Every sensible man would have turned back, but I've never been accused of being sensible. At the end of the alley stood a building that breathed dust. Its facade was strangled by ivy, its windows blind with grime. Above the door, a decaying sign swung in the wind. The Crane Public Library. Strange. Evelyn's surname. Coincidence? The kind that makes your spine itch. I pushed the door. It gave way too easily, as if it had been waiting. The air inside was cold and heavy, thick with the scent of mold, parchment, and something metallic beneath it, something that smelled like blood remembered. As my eyes adjusted, I saw rows upon rows of shelves stretching into shadow, their books swollen with moisture, pages curling like withered skin. Then I noticed something else. On the floor, between the stacks, wet footprints, bare, small, leading deeper into the library. And the most unsettling thing? They weren't mine. I followed the footprints, though every instinct in me screamed not to. The dim light filtering through the cracked skylight trembled as if afraid to linger. My shoes sank slightly into the warped floorboards, each step a soft groan in the silence. The footprints wound between the shelves like a trail laid by something that knew I would come. I crouched to study them, small, delicate, almost childlike, yet the stride was too long, too deliberate. A cold draft slithered through the rows, carrying with it the faint whisper of turning pages. But no one was there. I aimed my flashlight ahead. The beam was weak, the battery dying faster than it should. The darkness swallowed it like a living thing. Then I heard it. A voice, quiet and dry, as if spoken through paper. You shouldn't read what isn't written for you. The words brushed my ear from the left aisle, though I'd swear I saw movement on the right. My pulse began to drum a low warning in my throat. I called out, "Evelyn Crane? Is that you?" No answer. Only the soft thud of a book falling somewhere deeper in the dark. When I reached it, I found an open volume lying face down on the floor, its spine broken. I turned it over. There was no title, no author. Every page was blank, except one. In the middle of that page, written in what looked disturbingly like dried rust, were the words, "He's already here." And when I lifted my eyes, the footprints were no longer leading away from me. They were coming toward me. I froze. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied, barely. The footprints had multiplied, smudged and half-formed, spreading outward like something pacing in circles around me. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound, like someone inhaling through waterlogged lungs. Slow, deliberate, coming from the next aisle. I turned the corner, expecting, hoping, to find nothing. But the shelves here were strange. The books were wrong. Their spines pulsed faintly under the beam, as though something inside them was breathing. The smell of ink was thick now, sharp and metallic, cutting through the mold. I reached out, against reason, and touched the nearest volume. The leather was warm, and then it shivered. I jerked my hand back as a faint whisper rose from the shelves, not from one book, but all of them, together, like 1,000 voices murmuring beneath the floorboards. He reads us. He remembers. He shouldn't be here. I stumbled back, and my heel struck something solid. I turned, and nearly dropped the light. There was a figure standing in the aisle behind me. Or rather, the impression of one. A silhouette made of dust and shadow, as if the air itself had decided to take form. It tilted its head, almost curiously, and whispered with a dry rattle, "Detective." And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it scattered, burst apart into ash that drifted like gray snow down the corridor. When I breathed again, I realized something had changed. The shelves had shifted. The exit was gone. I spun around, expecting to see the main doors where I'd entered, the cracked wood and the sliver of moonlight leaking through. But there was nothing. Only more shelves, taller, denser, leaning toward me like old trees aching to whisper their secrets. The air had gone still, too still. Even the sound of the storm outside had vanished, as if the world beyond the library had been erased. I tried to retrace my steps, counting rows, following memory. But the path was wrong. Every corner turned into another. Every shelf led deeper. The floor tilted slightly, as though the building were breathing beneath my boots. The whispering began again, quieter this time. Closer. He walks the unwritten path. He turns pages that cannot end. I found myself in a narrow corridor between two immense bookcases. The wood was damp, the smell of rot stronger than ever. My flashlight flickered, catching faint scratches along the shelves, letters carved in desperation. Names, dates, single words, help, stay, forgotten. One word was fresher than the rest, the edges of the carving still splintered. Evelyn. My throat tightened. I pressed on, pulse hammering, until I reached a dead end, a wall of books. But one volume, black and unmarked, jutted slightly forward. I pulled it free. The wall shifted. A section of shelving groaned and turned on hidden hinges, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. A faint sound drifted from below, soft, rhythmic, wet. It took me a moment to recognize it. Someone was turning pages down there. The staircase sighed under my weight, each step releasing a faint puff of dust that shimmered in the beam of my dying flashlight. The deeper I went, the colder it became. Not the kind of cold that stings the skin, but one that seeps straight into the bones, quiet and ancient. The sound of turning pages grew louder, steadier, almost ritualistic. Whoever, or whatever, was below wasn't just reading. It was performing something. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a wide, low-ceilinged chamber. The air shimmered with candlelight. Hundreds of them, guttering weakly, wax crawling down their sides like pale, melted fingers. In the center of the room stood a table of black oak. On it lay an open tome the size of a coffin lid, its pages yellow and veined like old skin. The words inside shifted as I watched, rearranging themselves into different shapes. I caught fragments that vanished as soon as I read them. Names, dates, screams. And then I saw her, Evelyn Crane, or what was left of her. She was seated at the table, her hair matted with ink and dust, her eyes hollow, fixed on the book. Her fingers moved mechanically, turning a page every few seconds, as though trapped in some eternal task. I whispered her name. She stopped. Slowly, too slowly, her head turned toward me. Her lips cracked open, and from them came a voice that wasn't hers anymore. It's already writing you. Then, before I could move, the candles shuddered. Their flames stretched long and thin, bending toward me like reaching hands. And the book began to bleed. The blood, if that's what it was, seeped from between the pages, dark and thick, crawling across the table like it had a will of its own. It moved toward the edge, forming slow rivulets that dripped soundlessly onto the stone floor. Each drop left behind a faint hiss, as if the ground itself recoiled. Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes, glassy and unfocused, fixed on me. I wanted to reach her, to pull her away from that grotesque altar, but my legs refused to obey. Something in the air held me still, like a hand pressing down on my chest. The words on the open page began to shift faster now, writhing, rearranging into a shape I could almost understand. I took a step closer, squinting, and the letters breathed. They spelled my name. Detective A. Merrow. A tremor ran through me. The ink beneath my name began to flow outward, sketching my outline, the angle of my coat, even the faint scar across my cheek. It was drawing me, writing me. Evelyn's voice cracked through the silence, hoarse and distant. It writes what it consumes, step away before it finishes. But even as she spoke, her fingers continued to turn the pages, as if her body no longer belonged to her. The candles guttered again, their light dimming to embers. In that half-darkness, I saw movement beyond the table, a cluster of shadows, human-shaped but wrong, crawling across the walls and ceiling, stretching toward us. One of them whispered, a sound like a knife dragged through parchment. Every reader leaves a mark, and the blood that had reached the floor began to trace letters beneath my boots. The words were simple, terrifyingly simple. He's inside now. The floor pulsed beneath me, as if the words themselves had a heartbeat. I stumbled back, but the ink followed, thin lines stretching across the stone, curling around my boots like curious snakes. The air was thick, charged with a whispering pressure, as though the room itself had begun to think. Evelyn rose from her chair. The motion was stiff, puppet-like. Ink veins marbled her neck, her hands. She wasn't alive, not entirely, but not gone either. Her voice was a rasping echo now. Once it writes you, it never stops. Every thought you have, every fear, it learns them all. The book slammed shut with a sound like thunder. The candles blew out, plunging everything into blackness. Then came the whisper. Not one voice this time, but hundreds. Inside my head, each syllable crawled down my spine. Detective, tell us what you've seen. Write it for us. Finish the story. I raised the flashlight, its dim beam quivering. The ink on the floor had spread, slick and alive, forming shapes, letters, again, arranging themselves into sentences faster than I could read them. I caught flashes. You came for her. You stayed for truth. Now truth comes for you. Evelyn turned toward me. Her eyes, hollow seconds ago, now burned with a faint red light. She took a step forward and left no shadow behind her. The whispering rose to a chorus. The ink surged upward, splattering against the walls, forming moving images of faces, screaming, whispering, pleading to be unwritten. And then I realized the faces weren't strangers. They were all me. Every one of them. The walls heaved like lungs, each surface slick with ink that shimmered in the unsteady light. My own reflection, no, reflections, stared back at me from every inch. Hundreds of my faces, all slightly wrong. Some older, some bloodless, some twisted in terror. They began to move. Each mouth opened at once, releasing a low, wet moan that rolled through the chamber like a storm. The sound made the candles, those few still burning, bend backward as if the air itself recoiled. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the noise wasn't outside. It was crawling inside my skull. You wrote us, they whispered. You dreamed this place. Now finish what you began. The words hit something deep, an echo of a memory I didn't want. The case, the missing historian, the address that shouldn't exist. All of it had felt planted, like a story written before I ever walked its pages. I stumbled back toward the stairs, but they were gone. The wall had closed over them, smooth and seamless, as if they'd never been there. Ink-dripped hands began to emerge from the walls, thin, trembling, my hands. They reached for me, grasping at my coat, smearing my sleeves with letters that burned into the fabric. Evelyn screamed, a raw, human sound this time, and for an instant her voice broke through the chorus. It's rewriting us both. Then the candles flared, flooding the room with violent white light. Every face on the wall turned toward me, mouths stretching wide in silent, identical smiles. And when the light died, Evelyn was gone. Only her chair remained, overturned, and on the table, the book had opened again. Its first line now read, Part 9, The Detective Remains. The words stared up at me from the page like an accusation. The detective remains. Not lives, not survives. Just remains. The ink shimmered faintly, as though it was still drying. My hands trembled above it. For a heartbeat, I could smell my own scent in the air. Gun oil, rain, and something older, like parchment burned too long in the flame. I didn't remember opening the book, yet there it was, lying before me, waiting. The pages turned on their own, slow and deliberate, whispering against one another like dry leaves. The new page showed a sketch. My sketch. I stood in the center of the drawing, holding my flashlight, surrounded by shelves that curved inward like ribs. But the image didn't stay still. The lines began to move, stretching, bending, reshaping. The figure, my figure, started to tilt, melting into the ink, its face dripping away like wax. Then the voice came again. Not Evelyn's this time. Not the whispers from the walls. Something deeper, ancient, amused. You searched for a missing woman. You found a missing story. But every story needs an ending. The lights flared again, briefly revealing something that hadn't been there before. A doorway behind the table, narrow and black as the space between thoughts. Carved above it were the words, The Author's Room. The ink along the floor began to slither toward it, as though beckoning me forward, forming words that pulsed faintly beneath my feet. He always goes in. My pulse thundered. I knew every step was wrong. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. So I did what any detective does when the trail goes cold. I followed it into the dark. The doorway swallowed me whole. It wasn't a passage in the ordinary sense. It shifted around me, its edges breathing in and out, as if the walls were made of lungs and silence. The air inside was dry, metallic. Every sound, my breath, my heartbeat, felt stolen, borrowed from someone else's chest. At the end of the narrow hall, a faint glow pulsed. Not candlelight, colder, steadier, like the reflection of lightning frozen in glass. Then the hall opened into a circular chamber. A desk stood at its center. Massive, ornate. The wood blackened, etched with strange sigils that shimmered faintly when I looked at them too long. Sheets of parchment lay scattered across its surface, each covered in handwriting that shifted and rippled like ink on water. Behind the desk sat a chair, and in the chair, a figure, not quite human. It looked as though it had been assembled from torn pages and quills, its skin parchment pale, veins flowing with liquid ink. Its eyes were twin pools of bottomless black, reflecting me 1,000 times over. When it spoke, its voice sounded like pen scratches and thunder. "Detective Marrow, you've walked through my margins long enough." I tried to speak, ask what it was, what it had done to Evelyn, but my throat locked. The thing smiled, lips cracking like paper burning. "Every library needs a keeper. Every keeper needs a story. She was the first draft. You are the revision." The pages on the desk began to tremble, fluttering in an unseen wind. One sheet slid free, drifting toward me. On it, written in a hand identical to mine, were 5 words. "You will finish the book." And beneath that, ink still wet, a new line forming itself. "He sits down to write." My knees buckled. I looked up. The chair opposite the figure was no longer empty. It was waiting for me. The chair creaked as I touched it, the sound drawn out and low, like something waking from a long sleep. The wood was warm beneath my fingers, not comforting warm, but alive warm, like flesh that remembered heat. The figure of Pages watched me without blinking. Ink leaked from the corner of its mouth, sliding down its jaw and dripping onto the desk. "You've already written half," it said. "You just don't remember the other part." I sat. I don't know why. Perhaps because every part of me already knew resistance meant nothing here. The chair adjusted to my weight with a sigh that felt disturbingly human. A quill rose from the table of its own accord. The tip hovered over the open page before me. There were no words, only faint grooves, impressions, as if a story had been written and then erased. "What happens to Evelyn?" I forced the question out, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. The thing tilted its head, and the room shuddered with the motion. "She ended the moment she was read. You will end when you are written." The quill dipped into the inkwell, and without my hand moving, it began to write. The sound, scratch, 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 filled every corner of the chamber. I looked down. It was writing my thoughts. Every one. He wants to stand. He cannot. He wonders how long before the ink reaches him. And as I read, I noticed the skin on my hands darkening, the veins swelling, black liquid threading through them like rivers beneath thin ice. The figure leaned closer, its breath dry and cold. "The book isn't cursed, detective. It's hungry." And the next line appeared on the page, letter by letter, before my eyes. "He realizes it's writing his end." The quill kept scratching, faster now, its tip whispering through the paper like an insect trapped in prayer. My name appeared again and again between the lines, each repetition thinner, more frantic, until it no longer looked like language at all, just looping hunger. The room itself began to blur. The walls dissolved into curtains of parchment, each sheet covered with fragments of scenes I knew too well. The rain in Wren Alley, the footprints, Evelyn's hollow eyes. I reached out, and my fingers passed straight through them, each page cold as fog. The figure behind the desk leaned back, its form crumbling slightly, flakes of script falling from its shoulders. "Do you see it now?" it murmured. "Stories eat their tellers. Always have." The pages hanging around me started to twist, their edges curling inward. I could see versions of myself trapped within them, mouths opening in silent screams. The ink on my hands crawled higher, a creeping frost made of letters. Every heartbeat smeared another word into my skin. I tried to shout, anything, to break the rhythm of the quill. Instead, the sound that came out was a whisper not my own. Once a detective, now a page. The figure raised a skeletal hand. The quill froze. The ink on my body pulsed once, twice, and then stopped moving. For the briefest second, there was silence, thick, absolute. Then the desk split down the middle. The pages scattered like birds. and through the whirlwind of paper, I saw something impossible. A door. Wooden. Cracked. With light leaking through the keyhole. Real light. I staggered toward it, ink dripping from my fingers. Each step made the chamber fade, the whispering dimming to a distant heartbeat. I reached for the handle and heard the figure's voice, faint but certain. "You can leave, detective, but the story won't." The handle was ice against my palm. For a moment, I feared it would vanish before I could turn it. Just another illusion drawn in ink and breath. But it held, solid, old, trembling like the library itself knew what I was about to do. I twisted. The lock groaned, metal grinding against memory. Then came the sound I hadn't realized I'd missed, the hiss of rain. Real rain. The door opened onto Wren Alley, slick cobblestones glimmering beneath a sickly lamplight. I stumbled out, the night air cold and sharp in my lungs. Behind me, the library loomed in silence, its windows black, its doorway already closing, sealing itself shut with a sigh like turning pages. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over. But then I saw the puddles. They weren't reflecting the alley, or the lamps, or me. Each ripple showed rooms, aisles of books, Evelyn's pale face, the ink figure sitting at its desk. The images shimmered and changed, like the story watching from below. Something inside the nearest puddle moved. My reflection blinked before I did. I staggered back, heartbeat thundering in my ears. I pulled the notebook from my coat pocket, the one I used for every case. It was damp, pages curled, but clean, blank, until I flipped to the last page. There, in neat handwriting that wasn't mine, was a single line. Part 14, the detective writes again. And beneath it, the faint scent of ink. Fresh. The rain began to fall harder, washing the words away, but not fast enough. They bled into the page. And for the first time, I wasn't sure whether the ink was drying or breathing that I ducked under the archway of a closed shop, shielding the notebook from the rain. The lamps buzzed faintly, their light turning the puddles into small, trembling mirrors. Every sound, the wind, the water, even my breath, seemed to move to some hidden rhythm. The same slow beat I'd heard in the library. I wiped the cover clean and opened the notebook again. Blank. No, almost blank. A faint pulse stirred beneath the paper, as if the words were hiding just under the surface, waiting to be born. My hand began to shake. Then, without thinking, I took the pencil from my coat pocket and placed its tip on the page. The moment I touched it, something shifted behind my eyes. The alley dimmed, sounds blurred. It felt like falling through my own thoughts. The pencil started to move. I wasn't guiding it. The strokes came fast, frantic. I tried to drop it, but my fingers refused to let go. The graphite hissed against the paper, forming letters that spiraled into sentences. I watched in disbelief as I wrote the scene I had just escaped. The desk, the figure, the bleeding book, Evelyn's face. Then came a sentence I did not remember living. The detective brings the library with him. I froze, looked around. The rain was no longer hitting the ground. It hung in the air, each droplet trembling, suspended, tiny globes of ink instead of water. The world was rewriting itself, line by line, around me. And from the end of the alley, through the drifting mist, I saw a movement, tall shadows forming, carrying the soft sound of turning pages. The story had followed me out. It wanted to be finished. The alley folded in on itself, brick by brick, as though the world were being erased behind me. The rain no longer smelled like rain. It smelled like ink and smoke and endings. I ran. I didn't know where to, only away, away from the shadows that trailed me, stretching longer than they should, their whispers brushing my neck. Finish it. Write it down. You can't leave a story unfinished. I burst from the alley onto the main street. The town was gone. Only fog remained, white, endless, and waiting. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees, the notebook still clutched tight. Its pages fluttered open to the last one. The same handwriting, the same patient hand. Part 15, the final page. And beneath it, a single unfinished sentence. The detective looks up and sees. Nothing more. I stared at it, the pencil trembling in my hand. The fog pressed closer, whispering in 100 borrowed voices, Evelyn's among them. If you don't end it, it will. So I pressed the pencil down and wrote the only thing that came to me. Himself, still sitting at the desk. The world stopped. The fog froze. The whispers ceased. When I looked around, I was back in the author's room. The quill lay still. The ink had dried. Across from me, the figure of Pages was gone. Only the chair remained, empty, facing me. I looked down at the desk. The book lay open. Its final line read, "And so the detective finished the story, but never closed the book." I reached out, hesitated, and then, slowly, shut it. The sound was soft, final. Outside, somewhere far above the ink and dust, I thought I heard rain again. Or maybe, just pages turning.